Welcome to one of the most incredible rescue stories ever recorded. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing which places, and at what times of day or night, these documented accounts reach. She stood at the edge of the bridge, staring down at the water below, her helmet clutched in trembling hands, and whispered the words that would haunt her for months to come: "I'm done saving people." But God had other plans. And sometimes, the most broken hearts are chosen for the most miraculous rescues. Sarah Mitchell had been a firefighter for 12 years. 12 years of running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. 12 years of holding hands in ambulances, of whispering "you're going to be okay," to strangers who became angels too soon. She wore her badge with honor, her uniform with pride, and her scars like a soldier who'd seen too much war. But on a cold February morning in Portland, Oregon, everything Sarah believed about herself shattered like glass against concrete. It was supposed to be a routine call. A house fire on Maple Street, a neighborhood she knew well, where children rode bikes and families waved from porches. The flames were already consuming the second floor when Engine 47 arrived, black smoke billowing into the gray winter sky like a prayer that couldn't reach heaven. Sarah was the first one through the door, as always, her instincts sharp, her movements precise. She could hear it before she saw it, the sound that every firefighter dreads, a child crying somewhere in the smoke. His name was Tommy. 7 years old. Brown hair, freckles across his nose, wearing Superman pajamas. She found him huddled in a closet on the second floor, his small body curled against the wall, his eyes wide with terror. Sarah reached for him, her voice calm despite the chaos, telling him everything would be all right, that she had him, that he was safe now. She lifted him into her arms, felt his heart racing against her chest, and turned toward the stairs. That's when the floor gave way. It happened in seconds, but Sarah would relive it in slow motion for the rest of her life. The wood splintering beneath her boots, the sensation of falling, the desperate way she twisted her body to shield Tommy, to take the impact herself. They crashed through to the first floor, a tangle of debris and flames and screaming. Sarah's shoulder hit first, then her head, and the world went white with pain. But she held on. She held on to that little boy with everything she had, crawling through the fire, dragging him toward the light, toward the door, toward air and grass and sirens. She got him out. She handed him to the paramedics, watched them place an oxygen mask over his small face, saw his mother collapse to her knees in gratitude. Sarah stood there, swaying, her uniform scorched, blood trickling down her temple, and she smiled. She smiled because he was alive. Because she'd done her job. Because that's what heroes do. Tommy died 3 hours later at the hospital. Internal injuries. Something they couldn't see, couldn't fix, couldn't fight. The fall had damaged him in ways that only showed themselves when it was too late. And Sarah, standing in that sterile waiting room, still in her soot-stained uniform, still believing he'd be okay, felt something inside her die too. She didn't cry. Not at the hospital, not at the funeral she attended alone in the back row, not during the mandatory counseling sessions where she sat in silence, staring at the wall. She just went numb, a hollow version of herself, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Her captain told her to take time off. Her friends told her it wasn't her fault. Her mother told her to pray. But Sarah couldn't hear any of it through the deafening voice in her head that repeated the same question over and over. What's the point of saving people if they die anyway? 6 months passed like seasons changing without color. Sarah quit the fire department. She packed up her apartment in Portland and moved to a cabin in the mountains of Northern California, a place so remote that the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. She wanted isolation. She wanted silence. She wanted to disappear into a life where no one needed saving, including herself. She stopped answering calls. She stopped going to church. She stopped praying. Because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Tommy's face, and every time she tried to speak to God, the words felt like lies. The cabin was old but sturdy, surrounded by pine trees that whispered secrets in the wind. Sarah spent her days chopping wood, fixing the roof, walking trails that led nowhere. She told herself this was healing, this solitude, this self-imposed exile from the world. But deep down, beneath the numbness, beneath the anger, there was a grief so profound it felt like drowning on dry land. She'd built her entire identity on saving people, and now that identity was gone, leaving behind only the shell of who she used to be. It was a Sunday morning in late August when Sarah heard the barking. She was on her porch, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the mountains, when the sound cut through the stillness, frantic and desperate. At first she ignored it. Animals barked all the time out here, coyotes and foxes and the occasional lost dog. But this was different. This was urgent. This was a cry for help that even her hardened heart couldn't ignore. Sarah set down her mug and walked toward the sound, following it down a rocky path that led to a steep ravine about a quarter-mile from her cabin. The barking grew louder, more panicked, and when she reached the edge and looked down, her breath caught in her throat. 20 feet below, trapped on a narrow ledge with a sheer drop beneath him, was a dog. A golden retriever, his fur matted with dirt and blood, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, his eyes locked on Sarah with an expression that pierced through every wall she'd built. He wasn't just barking. He was begging. Sarah's first instinct was to walk away. To tell herself it was too dangerous, too risky, too painful. She'd sworn she was done with this, done with rescue missions and playing hero and carrying the weight of other lives on her shoulders. She'd come here to escape all of that. But as she stood there, staring down at that dog, something shifted inside her. It was subtle, like the first crack in ice before it breaks, but it was there. A whisper that sounded less like her own voice and more like something divine. "This is why you're here." No, Sarah thought. No, I can't. I won't. Not again. But the dog kept barking, kept looking at her with eyes that held no judgment, no expectation, only hope. Pure, unfiltered hope that she could do what seemed impossible. And in that moment, Sarah realized something that broke her heart and put it back together at the same time. This wasn't about her. It had never been about her. Not with Tommy, not with any of the lives she'd touched. It was about showing up. It was about trying. It was about being the hands and feet of something greater, even when it hurt, even when it failed, even when it felt like the weight would crush her completely. Sarah ran back to her cabin, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't in months. She grabbed rope, her old climbing harness, gloves, a first aid kit. Her hands shook as she geared up, muscle memory kicking in despite the fear. She hadn't done this in so long, hadn't trusted herself, hadn't believed she deserved to be trusted. But that dog didn't care about her past. He only cared about right now. Back at the ravine, Sarah secured the rope to a sturdy tree and tested it twice, then 3 times. She said a prayer, the first real prayer she'd spoken in half a year, and it came out broken and raw. "God, if you're still there, if you still listen to someone like me, please don't let me fail again. Please." Then she lowered herself over the edge. The descent was treacherous, the rocks loose and crumbling under her boots. Sarah focused on her breathing, on each careful movement, on not looking down at the drop that could kill them both. The dog watched her approach, his barking turning to whimpers, and when she finally reached the ledge, barely wide enough for both of them, he licked her hand. Just once. A simple gesture that said, "Thank you," and "I knew you'd come," and "You're not alone," all at once. Sarah examined his leg, her training flooding back despite the months away. It was broken, badly, and he was dehydrated, probably trapped here for days. She fashioned a makeshift splint from branches and secured it with strips from her shirt, whispering to him the whole time, the same words she'd once whispered to Tommy, "You're going to be okay. I've got you. You're safe now." But this time as she said them, she let herself believe them too. Getting back up was harder than coming down. Sarah rigged a harness for the dog using the rope and part of her belt, holding him against her chest as she climbed, his weight pulling at her injured shoulder, her muscles screaming with every inch. Halfway up, her foot slipped, and for a terrifying moment they dangled in the air, spinning slowly, the ground waiting far below. Sarah closed her eyes and did something she hadn't been able to do since Tommy died. She let go of control. She stopped trying to carry everything alone. She whispered, "Help me," and she meant it not just as words but as a surrender, a confession that she couldn't do this on her own, that she'd never been able to, that maybe that was okay. And somehow, impossibly, she found a foothold. She found strength she didn't know she had left. She pulled them both up, inch by agonizing inch, until her hands gripped solid ground and she collapsed on the grass, the dog beside her, both of them alive, both of them breathing, both of them saved. Sarah lay there for a long time, staring up at the sky, tears finally streaming down her face, not tears of grief but tears of release. She'd spent 6 months running from the pain, from the guilt, from the belief that she wasn't enough. But lying there on that mountain, covered in dirt and sweat and dog slobber, she understood something profound. She hadn't failed Tommy. She'd given him every ounce of her strength, every piece of her heart. Sometimes we do everything right and still face loss. Sometimes our best efforts don't change the outcome. But that doesn't make the trying any less sacred. That doesn't make the love any less real. The dog nuzzled against her side, and Sarah wrapped her arm around him, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. She'd saved him. Or maybe in the truest sense he'd saved her. He'd called her back from the edge of her own personal ravine, reminded her who she was beneath the grief, shown her that hope isn't about guarantees or happy endings. Hope is about showing up even when it hurts. Hope is about trying even when you're terrified of failing. Hope is about believing that every act of love matters, even the ones that break your heart. Sarah named him Justice. She took him to the vet in town, stayed by his side through surgery, brought him home to the cabin where he learned to walk again, slowly, with a slight limp that matched the one in her soul. They healed together, two broken creatures teaching each other what it means to live again. And gradually, over weeks and months, Sarah felt something returning that she thought she'd lost forever: purpose. She started volunteering at the animal shelter in the nearest town. She began reaching out to her old friends, tentatively rebuilding bridges she'd burned. She returned to church, sitting in the back pew with Justice beside her, a service dog now, his head resting on her knee during prayers. And one cold February morning, exactly 1 year after Tommy's death, Sarah drove to Portland and visited his grave for the first time. She brought flowers, white lilies, and she sat in the grass and talked to him. She told him she was sorry, not for trying to save him but for forgetting that his life had mattered, that those 7 years had been filled with love and laughter and joy, and that her carrying him through those flames had given his mother a chance to hold him one more time, to say goodbye, to know he hadn't been alone. She told Tommy that she understood now, that sometimes our purpose isn't to prevent every tragedy but to be light in the darkness, to be love in the face of loss, to be the answer to someone's prayer even when we feel like we're falling apart ourselves. The wind picked up, rustling through the cemetery trees, and Sarah felt it like a whisper, like a small hand touching her shoulder, like forgiveness she'd never needed to earn because it had always been there, waiting for her to accept it. She cried, the deep wrenching sobs she'd held back for a year, and Justice pressed against her, grounding her, reminding her that grief and hope can exist in the same heart, that brokenness and beauty are not opposites but partners in the dance of being human. Sarah eventually returned to firefighting, but differently this time. She became a trainer, teaching young firefighters not just the technical skills but the emotional ones, how to carry the weight without letting it crush you, how to find meaning in the mission even when outcomes aren't what you hoped for, how to remember that every life you touch is changed forever, including your own. She spoke at conferences about trauma and resilience. She started a nonprofit that paired retired firefighters with rescue dogs, creating bonds that healed both. And through it all, Justice was beside her, a living reminder that sometimes God's answers to our prayers don't look like what we expected. Sometimes they come on 4 legs, trapped on a ledge, calling us back to who we're meant to be. There's a photo on Sarah's desk now, in her small office at the fire station where she teaches. It's Tommy smiling in his Superman pajamas, and next to it, a photo of Justice, golden and grinning. She looks at them every morning before classes begin, these two souls who taught her the most important lesson of her life. We are not defined by the people we couldn't save. We are defined by our willingness to try, to love, to keep showing up even when our hearts are shattered, to be vessels of grace in a world that desperately needs it. The scars remain. Sarah still has nightmares sometimes, still carries guilt that flares up in quiet moments. But she's learned that healing isn't about erasing the pain, it's about integrating it, letting it become part of your story without letting it write the ending. She's learned that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about what you do after you've been broken. She's learned that God doesn't always answer our prayers with miracles, but sometimes He answers them with second chances, with unexpected angels, with a dog on a ledge who looks at you like you're exactly who he's been waiting for. And on the hardest days, when doubt creeps in and the weight feels too heavy, Sarah closes her eyes and remembers that moment on the ravine, hanging in midair, the ground far below, and how she whispered, "Help me," and found the strength to keep climbing. She remembers that we're never as alone as we feel, that there are forces at work beyond our understanding, weaving purpose through our pain, turning our trials into testimonies that might save someone else who's standing at their own edge, wondering if it's worth it to keep trying. It's always worth it, every single time. Because you never know when your broken heart might be exactly what someone else needs to believe in wholeness again. Let us pray together. Heavenly Father, for every soul who feels they've failed, who carries the weight of loss and wonders if their efforts matter, wrap your arms around them now. Remind them that they are not measured by outcomes but by their willingness to love even when it hurts. Give them strength to try again, courage to show up, and faith to believe that every act of compassion echoes in eternity. Help them see that brokenness is not the end of their story but the beginning of your greatest work through them. In your infinite grace, amen. If this story touched your heart, if you need reminders that hope is real and purpose is waiting even in your darkest valley, subscribe to this channel and join our community. Let's keep praying together, keep believing together, keep reminding each other that we are never too broken to be used for something beautiful. Your story isn't over and neither is ours. We'll see you in the next one.